But first off, there were emotional scenes at Dublin's Henry Street today as dozens of members of the Congolese community attended a vigil for a man who died following an incident on Friday evening. 35-year-old Congolese-born Yves Sakila had been detained following an alleged shoplifting incident during which a man in his 80s had been injured. There are concerns that excessive force may have been used on Mr. Sakila. Footage captured by passers-by shows him being restrained by 5 people. When Gardaí arrived on the scene, he was unresponsive and was pronounced dead in the Mater Hospital a short time later. In a statement this evening, Arnott's said no loss of life should ever be the outcome of a retail security incident. It said it's cooperating with Gardaí and is conducting a full review with the independently contracted security firm that provides in-store security services. We're joined now by the Minister of State at the Department of Justice, Niall Collins, Social Democrats TD and Party Justice spokesperson Gary Ganon, and news correspondent with the Journal, Eimer McAuley. Do get involved in the conversation tonight. Send us your comments. Simply scan the QR code or contact us via the WhatsApp number. Niall Collins, to you first. What is your reaction to the video of the death of Yves Sakila?
Well, first of all, I want to express my condolences and my sympathies to his family. It's really, it's a shocking incident. There's no two ways about it. I viewed the video footage which is circulating online. I just felt it was appropriate to look at that, given that it was coming on the show tonight to discuss this. I would also appeal to anybody who has, any kind of camera footage or indeed any information pertinent, that they should pass that to An Garda Síochána, who are investigating this. As we know, there's 2 parallel investigations. FISRU have to look at the interactions of An Garda Síochána, who came to the scene, and obviously An Garda Síochána will interview the whole circumstances of the incident itself. So really, I think a lot of people, most of Ireland will be absolutely appalled by this. It's really, really disturbing, and it just shows you how sometimes events can get out of hand. There will be so many questions that will have to be addressed in terms of the investigation in relation to this. I think there's a long way to go, obviously. The fact that An Garda Síochána are now involved and have to be allowed the time and the space to carry out all of their work. There will obviously have to be a post-mortem. We also have to keep in mind the elderly person who reportedly was also injured by virtue of the incident. So I think taking it all together, I think we just have to allow the time and the space to give everybody that opportunity to do what they're supposed to do, and to make sure that that there's no questions afterwards in relation to that nobody can question the investigation that's happening.
Yeah, and we might come back to that.
Pick holes in that. I think it's very important for the whole transparency of it.
Yeah, Gary Ganon, your thoughts?
The video footage was absolutely horrendous. I don't think anyone that saw that couldn't come away with they're just simply aghast at what we were witnessing through our phones. I want to express our solidarity, sympathy and compassion and condolences to the family of the man who lost his life, his friends, also to the 80-year-old man who was injured. But I think, we also need to ensure that this investigation is thorough, it's transparent, and it gives confidence. There also needs to be a recognition that there is a wider community, particularly our migrant community, who are genuinely hurting. They're feeling fear. They're looking for some degree of leadership, both from us in politics and elsewhere. And I think that needs to also be to the fore. And that's something that needs to happen quickly in terms of how the state and those in power engage with communities, migrant communities who are feeling quite abandoned at the moment, quite hurting. And I think we need to actually reach out there quickly.
OK, and we will definitely come back to that. Eimer, just before I come to you, because I know you were at the vigil earlier on today, but our reporter Mairead Cleary was also there. She spoke to members of the Congolese community who were attending the event. Just have a listen.
I wonder where the guards were. I wonder where in public like this, someone in the street, no one is coming even to stop, even to do things like.
There's lots of sadness and anger, so we don't know what to do. We don't know where to go, except just to be together and mourn the young soul that passed. Like, we were all so moved to see all that, the flower ladies coming out, giving out flowers, like for free. And this shows the Dublin. I've been in Dublin for past 30 years, seeing all that. This is the Dublin I know 30 years back, all the community coming up together.
Eimer, obviously a very nice touch there from the flower ladies bringing up those flowers, but you were there as well. What kind of emotion? I'm sure it was very emotional there today, was it?
It was really emotional. It was kind of a mix between a vigil in memory of him and also a protest. You know, there were prayers being chanted, but then there were also chants, you know, calling for justice and for a thorough investigation, you know, into the circumstances around his death. You know, at one stage, a woman was on her knees in front of those flowers, speaking in her own language, in absolute tears, absolutely distraught, speaking about the pain that this man's mother must be feeling right now. So I think, you know, when I was speaking to people who knew Yves Sakila, they were saying that he was a nice man, that he had ups and downs in his life. They just couldn't understand, you know, how he had come to die in these circumstances. And I think
Do we know much about him?
Yeah, we know that he lived in Galway for a short while, that he lived in West Dublin, that he went to school in Blanchardstown, I was told today. I think he was living in supported accommodation. So maybe somebody who was vulnerable in our society. You know, we know that he came to Ireland with his aunt and uncle, you know, obviously when he was still at a school age. We know that his family are still in the Democratic Republic of Congo. I spoke to people who've spoken to them today. They're obviously in absolute shock. I mean, what do they do? He's here, you know, his body is here and they're in, you know, in their home country. It's just an unimaginable set of circumstances for a family to be in. So yeah, there was real grief there today, but there was also palpable anger.
I was going to say grief and also anger as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think people, you know, in the Congolese community do feel, you know, that potentially his skin colour was a factor in how he was treated. Obviously, the incident itself is
we have
under
to be very
investigation.
careful about jumping to any conclusions in relation to anything that happened, and this will obviously be fully investigated.
Yeah, definitely. I think that, you know, people who are part of that community, it's a small community. They said it's tight-knit. So to see somebody that they knew, you know, die in this manner, it was just very traumatic for a large amount of people who were there today. And, you know, I think it was reminiscent of, you know, what we saw with the George Floyd video, you know, just under 6 years ago. So it's particularly traumatic in that way for people as well.
All right, take a pause there, guys, because before we came on air, I spoke to the director of the Irish Network Against Racism, Shane O'Curry, to get his reaction to the video.
You know, watching it, there were very strong echoes of that infamous video of the death of George Floyd at the hand of police in the US, and I have to say it was extremely harrowing and upsetting to watch. And you know, I guess the next train of thought of mine was what a kind of impact this was going to have on the community, really at this fragile time in the context of you know, the growing anti-migrant movement and protests since 2022, the riot in Dublin in November 2023, and the atmosphere of unfettered, open hostility that many migrants and minority people now experience after those significant events. The community's faith in the authorities' ability to investigate impartially and fairly is fragile. And I'm speaking to the data that we have in our research from last year, commissioned by the Policing Authority, into the experiences of African and Brazilian communities in Ireland of the police. We also find that there's a great deal of uncertainty and a great deal of nervousness about the police. and just a lack of faith that there will be follow through in an investigation. And I'm speaking to community perceptions here. And so what I'm saying is there's a lot riding on this. And, we're at a moment where, in the context of open hostility towards people from minority backgrounds and where there is this widespread perception, there is a lot hinging on the investigations into this.
OK, Shane O'Curry there. Gary Gann, let's just talk in a wider sense, that point that Shane O'Curry was making about generally a lack of faith in the migrant community in the Gardaí's ability to investigate incidents. Where do you think that comes from? Because I should point out, and Garda Síochána would say they take any hate crime seriously and would investigate it thoroughly. Yet it would seem that people in migrant communities don't have confidence that that's the case.
Yeah, and I suppose the best people to speak to the experience of a migrant community would be a migrant themselves. But looking at the data as presented by people like Shane O'Curry and the organisation he works for, does quite clearly suggest that we have a problem, that there are communities and people of colour all over Ireland who don't feel that they have the confidence in the state when it comes to investigations of crimes that they have experienced. And look, if communities are telling us that, we have to listen. We have to understand where that fear has come from, where the evidence that they're pointing to in order to endorse
Is the perception fair? I'm not in any way doubting the sincerity of the perception, but is it fair, do you think?
Shane, I'm probably not the right person to tell you if a perception of a person of colour is fair when it comes to how they are policed. But what I can say to you is that is certainly something that we have to listen to. I mean, if they're telling us that crimes that they're experiencing are not being investigated to the extent as other people's experiences of crime, we have to understand the truth of that and we have to be prepared to act. I mean, how many people of colour are in our Gardaí at the moment? How many people of colour are in actually many of our public services, teaching professions, Gardaí? That is certainly something that we have to consider. Politics, actually. That's certainly something that we have to be considerable. The media, all of these things, when you look in terms of the infrastructure of the state and you do not see your own reflection coming back to you, that is somehow going to create a sense of somebody seen a little bit kind of isolated, being scared, and I think they're the voices that we have to listen to.
Minister?
I wouldn't agree that An Garda Síochána have earned the reputation for being not up to the mark in terms of dealing with our immigrant communities. I would think a lot of immigrants who come to Ireland have probably had bad experiences in their own countries. Particularly people who've come here seeking international protection. They're fleeing war, they're fleeing regimes who were very, very oppressive. And, they would have had bad experiences potentially, and maybe that's colouring some of their view. Like An Garda Síochána are very transparent, they're very accountable now. There's plenty of layers of oversight. We've got the local community safety partnerships up and running in each area. You have the Garda authority, you've got the policing board, you've got FISTRU. There's lots of layers of oversight in terms of following things through. But I think just the whole area of migration, as we know, gets conflated between legal channels of migration and illegal channels of migration, and that's a real challenge for the likes of us as public representatives to try and filter out.
Gary Ganon,
I think it's also important to say when migrations or migrants' experience is talked about, particularly in the last number of years, it's all we ever talked about in the concept of a burden. Even say, for example, when homeless figures are released at the last Friday of every month, and we raise it in the Dáil, the Taoiseach and the Taoiseach have said, well, half of those figures are actually non-Irish. I mean, what has that got to do with anything in the concept of homelessness? But we're pointing to non-Irishness as a justification for failure.
The counter-argument to that, and I'm not pushing this argument, but the counter-argument is, if you don't know... Sorry, hold on a second.
I've never heard a Taoiseach say that.
I'm obviously going to play... we can actually get you the footage.
Okay, the counter-argument, Gary, is if you don't discuss these issues, well, then people say you're suppressing debate, you're not talking about it.
But that's also, if we're going to discuss the issue, we should also understand this. So say, for example, I'm obviously looking at opinion polls at the moment. So in Dublin Central, immigration was put as the third most important issue. The vote is quite low, actually, in fact. But it was always presented as those voters all have an issue with immigration. Rather than, for example, the East Wall for All groups, the Facebook groups, the Drunk for All groups, who would have an issue with how the state is managing actual human beings' lives. So whenever we see these figures, it's presented as a negative when it comes to to homeless figures, when it comes to people's views, that's something that I do have a problem with. Because, I mean, the most issue that I face in terms of Dublin Central is people contacting my office concerned about a friend who's been moved from an iPass centre into a homeless accommodation. And it's the state's failure. But then you get the voices who just generate and project hate, and they're the ones that get the platform.
Okay, just Eimer, just I want to bring Eimer in, then I'll come back to you. You were shaking your head there, Eimer. Why is that?
I think we have to listen to people if they say that they feel like their reports of crime aren't being taken as seriously, or if they're having negative experience. But the Minister's point is a relevant one, isn't it? That there may be an inherent and completely understandable mistrust of authority because of their experiences in their home country. Well, maybe there's a mistrust of authority because we have had a hardening of political rhetoric. That is undeniable. The conversation has shifted compared to where it was a few years ago. You don't think it could be in any way because of what happened in their home countries initially? That could obviously be a factor in individual cases. But the reality is here, you know, you have the government, you know, talking in a way that it wouldn't know of a few years ago about, you know, cracking down on deportations or, you know, putting people on flights. That's being tweeted in a way that's almost positive, where we don't recognise that, you know, forcible deportation is a traumatic thing for somebody to go through. You know, people are being put in prisons before they're deported now.
The argument would be every state deports.
They don't take pictures of it, though. I mean, this state took pictures of people going on the deportation flight. There's no other administration of justice in this state where the state will actually post pictures of the same justice being enacted. I mean, deportation...
Well, I'm not aware. I'm not aware if there are states to do that, Minister.
Sorry, I think we need to have an honest, wider discussion about migration. First of all,
in fairness, that's what we're doing now. We're having a wider, broader discussion.
We have to have a firm but fair and robust system of migration. We put a lot of
just let the Minister finish his point.
We put a lot of resources into that, and in terms of treating people fairly, we have our international obligations where when people present themselves seeking international protection, we have to give it due consideration and assessment. But at the same time, we have to have an obligation to the wider society in terms of our capacity to deal with this. And I think that it's important that we should put the numbers out there, because, as I said earlier, a lot of migration, the different forms of migration, gets conflated. So if you look at 2024 as a complete year, 185,000 people entered Ireland. Only 9% of the 185,000 people who came to Ireland came in seeking international protection. And that was one of the highest years. Everybody else came in on freedom of movement around the European Union, common travel area, work visas, returning Irish immigrants from right around the world, family reunification.
What's your point in relation to that? What's your point in relation to that, Minister? Those figures are true, but what's your point in relation to it?
My point is that all of the narratives and all of the conversations get conflated between people coming in on work permits, student visas, and people seeking international protection. But we have to have a robust migration system where ultimately, if we say to people, your application has been considered, we don't deem that you qualify for international protection. If there isn't an end point in the process whereby somebody is asked to leave or assisted to leave or deported, well, then there's no point in having a system in the first place. So it has to work. Yeah. And I don't think the criticism
we have your point, Minister. We have your point.
Of telling the public by way of tweet or otherwise what a deportation flight did and cost, that's public information which the public are entitled to.
Yeah.
Sorry, Niall, but you're saying there we have a firm and fair immigration system and we have the resources there to support that. It's not a firm and fair immigration system if you actually haven't even built a separate facility to put deportees in before they get on planes, and you're putting them in prisons that are incredibly overcrowded with over 100% capacity, 100 people sleeping on a mattress. Is it firm and fair if someone who overstays a visa here can end up in Clover Hill
before anybody is deported, they are asked to leave, they're offered financial assistance to leave, and failing those two options, they're then deported. You know, I mean, it's not...
generated a debate here that we weren't having. So I absolutely agree that deportation is a part of a firm and fair migration system if a person doesn't meet the standard. What I don't agree with is why that needs to be pictured of a person being led onto a plane. That's actually just a choice. There's no requirement on you to do that. But then even more broadly, in terms of firm or fair, we have people being handed tents and being told to go up and sleep at the mountains. People will show up.
There was nobody identified being led onto a plane. The point is, if a deportation flight takes place, which costs a significant amount of money to deport people, it's in the public interest that the public know A, it happened, and B, how much it cost.
That's absolutely fine, and that's.
Yeah.
But I'm not
So
sure why
what's
that
the
has to. So what other administration of justice happens in this state where a person is being pictured by the
There was
state
no person
itself and
pictured.
posted?
There was no person identified.
Okay.
That
No,
would
you
be,
might
that
want to
would
check
be,
that and maybe
that would be an absolute breach of a person's data protection rights. And I don't recall seeing the picture of any identifiable individual.
Okay, you'll probably have to retract that tomorrow. But even more broadly, a single person declaring themselves for asylum has been handed a tent, actually not handed a tent, it's sent down to a homeless charity, been told to get a tent and being placed at the bottom of a mountain. We had people setting up along the canals because the state's failure to accommodate. I believe in a fair system, but the mishandling of this state and then the scapegoating of people who've been failed has led to a harshening of rhetoric, and that is on this government.
Well, the facts are, Gary, as you know, migration and surges in migration are a worldwide phenomenon. It's something that we don't control. As you know, we have to try and deal with the consequences of it, and we have to try and deal with the effects of it coming in here. And there was a surge.
What would a Sock Den?
There was a surge.
What would a government with the Sock Den do differently?
You can't just magic up houses overnight. We have a housing crisis.
What would you do differently?
We would have enacted the recommendations of the Catherine Day report, which called for 9 state reception centres. Look what they do in the Netherlands, for example, where the cost of accommodating a person who's seeking asylum is about €10 a night in state accommodation, as opposed to, what is it in Ireland, about 60 in private accommodation. We have done what we always do in the state, where we monitorise depression for different operators, where the state absolves itself of responsibility to enact its own policy. So why can't we have the state reception centres that were promised?
We're doing that. We're doing that, as you know.
All right. Lots of texts coming in on this. Why are we framing this issue through the lens of race? We are opposing an American narrative on an Irish context, says one viewer.